My name is Ali, I'm a doctor and YouTuber.
I'm Taymor, I'm a data scientist and writer.
And you're listening to Not Overthinking,
the weekly podcast where we think about happiness, creativity, and the human condition. This week, for the first time ever, we are actually sponsored by someone. So we're finally going to get something out of this podcast. Ali, why don't you tell us a bit more about our sponsor this week?
Absolutely. So our sponsor this week happens to be Skillshare. Now, Skillshare is actually a really good online learning community. It's basically like a subscription service, sort of like Netflix, but instead of getting random TV shows and movies to waste your time with, you get access to a huge library of literally tens of thousands of online courses, ranging from all sorts of things from like productivity and entrepreneurship to drawing and writing and illustration, animation, and like all this sort of stuff. And Skillshare are great because they've actually been sponsoring my YouTube channel for the last like year or so, and I've actually got my own online course on Skillshare about how to edit videos using Final Cut Pro. So if anyone fancies starting a YouTube channel, you should definitely check out my own course on Skillshare. Other really good ones are my friend Thomas Frank. He's like this big productivity YouTuber. He's got his own Skillshare course about how to build your own productivity system, in which he kind of breaks down how to use a calendar and a to-do list and stuff effectively. And it sounds kind of boring on the surface, but it's actually like really well put together, and I learned a lot of tricks from that I've actually applied in my own life. But yeah, Skillshare is awesome. If you use the link in the show notes, or you can go on skillshare.com/not-overthinking. That's skillshare.com/not-overthinking. Then you can get a free 2-month trial, and then when the 2 months is up, you can sign up to a premium subscription if you really like, and that's less than $10 a month for unlimited access to all these courses. I've got a membership. I pay for it every month, even though they sponsor my videos and now sponsoring this podcast, and I genuinely think it is worth the money. So yeah, thanks Skillshare for sponsoring this podcast.
There is actually just one thing I'd like to add. I think what a really underrated way to consume online courses is basically as podcasts. So like depending on the course, a lot of things, yeah, it's nice to sort of watch someone teach you this thing, whether that's on YouTube or Skillshare or whatever. But for a lot of things, you don't actually need to be watching anything. And so listening to a course on how to write better, or a course on comedy, or anything like that, you can actually consume that just as a podcast. And so if you have access to high quality online courses, that sort of opens up a new way for you to sort of learn stuff on the go, at the gym, whatever.
That's actually a really good point. And they've actually got an app that I have not actually tried to use in the car, but I might try that next week or driving to work. See if I can consume some content about how to be funnier or something like that.
Yeah, that would really help.
Anyway, what are we going to talk about this week?
So this week, this is something that I think every week when we sit down to think of a topic, I propose this, and then it's like, oh, that's a tough one to do, requires a bit of prep, yada yada. But there is a very good essay, I suppose, by a chap called C.S. Lewis. You may have heard of him. And this essay talks about, I think, one of the biggest issues that certainly I've faced in my life. It talks about the desire that we all have to want to be part of exclusive inner circles when it comes to all sorts of things. And so just to start off, I'm going to read a bunch of excerpts from this essay. This is one of those things where in Instapaper, my sort of read it later app, basically the whole thing is highlighted. Just the whole thing is absolute gold. So I'm going to start off reading a few passages from that, and then we can talk about it.
Sounds good. Go for it, man. Oh, you haven't actually got them up?
Got it up.
You've got it up now. Cool. Well done.
All right, so C.S. Lewis says, I believe that in all men's lives at certain periods, and in many men's lives at all periods, one of the most dominant elements is the desire to be inside the local ring, and the terror of being left outside. This desire, in one of its forms, has indeed had ample justice done to it in literature, I mean in the form of snobbery. Victorian fiction is full of characters who are hag-ridden by the desire to get inside that particular ring, which is, or was, called society. But it must be clearly understood that society, in that sense of the word, is merely one of 100 rings, and snobbery, therefore, only one form of the longing to be inside. People who believe themselves to be free, and indeed are free from snobbery, and who read satires on snobbery with tranquil superiority, may be devoured by the desire in another form. It may be the very intensity of their desire to enter some quite different ring, which renders them immune from the allurements of high life. An invitation from a duchess would be very cold comfort to a man smarting under the sense of exclusion from some artistic or communistic coterie. Poor man, it is not large, lighted rooms or champagne, or even scandals about peers and cabinet ministers that he wants. It is the sacred little attic or studio, the heads bent together, the fog of tobacco smoke, and the delicious knowledge that we 4 or 5 all huddled beside the stove, are the people who know. Often the desire conceals itself so well that we hardly recognize the pleasures of fruition. Men tell not only their wives, but themselves that it's a hardship to stay late at the office, or the school on some bit of important extra work which they've been left in for because they and so-and-so and two others are the only people left in the place who really know how things are run. But it's not quite true. It is a terrible bore, of course, when old Fatty Smithson draws you aside and whispers, look here, we've got to get you in on this examination somehow. Or Charles and I saw that you've got to be on this committee. A terrible bore. But how much more terrible if you were left out? It is tiring and unhealthy to lose your Saturday afternoons, but to have them free because you don't matter, that is much worse.
Okay, right. So that's all very well and good, but like, you know, I consider myself someone reasonably smart, and I've done English literature, but I couldn't really keep up with the kind of that in spoken word format. So can you kind of summarize the main essence of his thing using simple English? Because he's writing in very like old school academic stuff.
Yeah. Okay, I'll summarize those bits. So basically he says, for most of us at various points in our lives, we're going to feel this desire to want to be part of some inner circle. Okay. And then he says that some of us may feel like we're above such desires. You know, we don't want anything fancy. We don't care about money. We don't care about this and that. But he says that this is actually quite dangerous, because plenty of those people who don't care about these sort of obvious exclusive things, they care about like an understated sort of exclusive thing, like, you know, being part of some, you know, a sort of small club of people who like really get, I don't know, some art or whatever, you know, where it's not really about money. It's just about having this sort of inner circle of people in the know. And he says that this desire to be inside these inner circles is quite often hard to see, because we kind of lie to ourselves and to other people about it. So he gives the example of like, oh, you know, if you're dragged into doing some extra thing at work on the weekend, you know, you complain about that to your wife. You kind of feel sorry for yourself, like, oh, I have to do this extra stuff. But if you were the person that never gets called up to do the extra stuff on the weekends, you'd feel even worse, because then it's like no one really cares, right?
Okay, yeah, that all makes sense so far.
So that's what he said so far. I will carry on. He says, I've skipped a bunch of paragraphs in between, and then he says, I have no right to make assumptions about the degree to which any of you may already be compromised. I must not assume that you've ever first neglected and finally shaken off friends whom you really loved and who might have lasted your lifetime in order to court the friendship of those who appeared to you more important, more esoteric. I must not ask whether you have derived actual pleasure from the loneliness and humiliation of the outsiders after you, whether you've talked to fellow members of the ring in the presence of outsiders simply in order that the outsiders might envy, whether the means whereby in your days of probation you propitiated the inner ring were always wholly admirable. I will ask only one question, and it is of course a rhetorical question which expects no answer. In the whole of your life as you remember it, has the desire to be on the right side of that invisible line ever prompted you to act or word on which in the cold small hours of a wakeful night you can look back with satisfaction? If so, your case is more fortunate than most. So what he's saying here is, he's saying, look, I'm not going to assume that any of, you know, that the listener has like cast aside their friends to try and find a cooler group of friends. He's not going to assume anything like that. He's not going to, you know, ask whether, you know, we've ever had like the pleasure of, you know, seeing someone else being excluded from this thing that we're a part of. And, you know, he's not going to ask whether we've like intentionally signaled to outsiders of a particular circle that we are insiders to that circle. He's saying like, he won't ask all of these things. The only thing he will ask is that, you know, when we've encountered the desire to be part of any kind of inner circle, looking back on how we've acted on that desire, are we ever actually satisfied with anything that's come from that? Like, are we ever proud of anything we did to be inside any inner circle? That's what he's asking.
Okay, yeah, I can see that.
Cool. And I'll read the next paragraph. He says, my main purpose in this address is simply to convince you that this desire is one of the great permanent mainsprings of human action. It is one of the factors which go to make up the world as we know it. This whole pell-mell of struggle, competition, confusion, graft, disappointment, and advertisement. And if it is one of the permanent mainsprings, then you may be quite sure of this. Unless you take measures to prevent it, this desire is going to be one of the chief motives of your life from the first day on which you enter your profession until the day when you are too old to care. That will be the natural thing. The life will come to you of its own accord. Any other kind of life, if you lead it, will be the result of conscious and continuous effort. If you do nothing about it, if you drift with the stream, you will, in fact, be an inner ringer. I don't say you'll be a successful one, that's as may be, but whether by pining and moping outside rings that you can never enter, or by passing triumphantly further and further in, one way or the other, you will be that kind of man. So what he's saying here is that this isn't like a side note that we should maybe think about occasionally. He's saying that if we don't intentionally think about this general issue, then by default we will end up being people who are driven by this desire to be inside sort of exclusive circles. He thinks this is so fundamental, like a desire in all of us, that if we don't actively do something against it, it'll be like the default way we live our lives. That's what he's saying.
Okay, fair enough.
He goes on, he says, I've already made it fairly clear that I think it better for you not to be that kind of man, i.e. the kind of man who desires to be inside these inner circles, but you may have an open mind on the question. I will therefore suggest 2 reasons for thinking as I do. It would be polite and charitable, and in view of your age, reasonable too, to suppose that none of you is yet a scoundrel. In this sort of essay, he's actually addressing, I don't know, some college graduates or something. So maybe like similar age kind of people to, I don't know, our listeners and us, I suppose. So he's saying, look, I'm not going to assume that any of you is yet a scoundrel. And then he says, on the other hand, by the mere law of averages, it is almost certain that at least 2 or 3 of you before you die will have become something very like scoundrels. So he's saying, I'm not calling you a scoundrel now, any of you, but chances are at least a few of you will become scoundrels at some point in your life. And then in the next paragraph, he says, and the prophecy I make is this: to 9 out of 10 of you, the choice which could lead to scoundrelism will come, when it does come, in no very dramatic colors. Obviously bad men, obviously threatening or bribing will almost certainly not appear. Over a drink or a cup of coffee, disguised as triviality and sandwiched between 2 jokes, from the lips of a man or woman whom you've recently been getting to know rather better, and whom you hope to know better still, just at the moment when you are most anxious not to appear crude or naive or prig, the hint will come. It'll be the hint of something which the public, the ignorant, romantic public, would never understand. Something which even the outsiders in your own profession are apt to make a fuss about. But something, says your new friend, which we, and the word we, you try not to blush for mere pleasure, something we always do. And you will be drawn in, if you are drawn in, not by desire for gain or ease, but simply at that moment when the cup was so near your lips, you cannot bear to be thrust back again into the cold outer world. It will be so terrible to see the other man's face, that genial, confidential, delightfully sophisticated face, turn suddenly cold and contemptuous, to know that you had been tried for the inner ring and rejected. And then if you are drawn in, next week it'll be something a little further from the rules, and next year something further still, but all in the jolliest, friendliest spirit. It may end in a crash, a scandal, and penal servitude. It may end in millions, a peerage, and giving the prizes at your old school. But you will be a scoundrel. So he's saying that, in the moments when we're faced with this desire, they're not going to be like dramatic moments, some mafia guy approaching you on the street saying, hey man, want to join the club? Just kill this guy and you're in. It's not going to be like that. It's going to be someone who, you've been getting to know a bit more. Maybe you sort of want their approval or something, and they'll ask you to do something, or they'll sort of say something that is kind of innocuous, that isn't like too, it's not too out there. And out of the desire not to like let them down, or not wanting to make things awkward, you may actually go along with that, and that'll be the first step on a slippery slope of doing more and more things which are scoundrelous, and ending up in a scoundrel. Does that make sense, Ali?
Yeah, reasonably so.
Okay, cool. He says later on, so that is my first reason, he says. Of all the passions, the passion for the inner ring is most skillful in making a man who is not yet a very bad man do very bad things.
Okay, so he's saying that this desire to fit into stuff is gonna be the death of us.
Yeah, he says it's a big force in like turning good people, making good people do bad things, basically.
Okay.
And so he says that's the first of his 2 reasons why this is such a bad force. The second, he says, my second reason is this. The torture allotted to the Danaids in the classical underworld, that of attempting to fill sieves with water, is a symbol not of one vice, but of all vices. It is the very mark of a perverse desire that it seeks what is not to be had. The desire to be inside the invisible line illustrates this rule. As long as you're governed by that desire, you will never get what you want. You are trying to peel an onion. If you succeed, there will be nothing left. Until you conquer the fear of being an outsider you will remain. He says a few more things. Then he says, the circle cannot have from within the charm it had from outside. By the very act of admitting you, it has lost its magic. Once the first novelty is worn off, the members of this circle will be no more interesting than your old friends. Why should they be? You were not looking for virtue or kindness or loyalty or humor or learning or wit or any of the things that can really be enjoyed. You merely wanted to be in. And that is a pleasure that cannot last. As soon as your new associates have been staled to you by custom, you will be looking for another ring. The rainbow's end will still be ahead of you. The old ring will now be the drab background for your endeavor to enter the new one. And you will always find them hard to enter for a reason you very well know. You yourself, once you're in, want to make it hard for the next entrant, just as those who are already in made it hard for you. Naturally, in any wholesome group of people which holds together for a good purpose, the exclusions are in a sense accidental. 3 or 4 people who are together for the sake of some piece of work exclude others because there is work only for so many of them, or because the others can't in fact do it. Your little musical group limits its numbers because the rooms they meet in are only so big. But your genuine inner ring exists for exclusion. There'd be no fun if there were no outsiders. The invisible line would have no meaning unless most people were on the wrong side of it. Exclusion is no accident, it is the essence. The quest of the inner ring will break your hearts unless you break it. But if you break it, a surprising result will follow. If, in your working hours, you make the work your end, you will presently find yourself all unawares inside the only circle in your profession that really matters. You will be one of the sound craftsmen, and other sound craftsmen will know it. So to summarize that, he says basically the inner rings are characterized by sort of their sole purpose almost being exclusion. He says there are sort of exclusive groups that might end up happening, like your musical band or whatever. You can't have unlimited people in that, but the point of the band is not exclusivity. In like a work scenario, there might be a few people who are doing some project, but the reason is because that's as many people as it takes, and maybe no one else can do it. The reason is not for the sake of exclusivity, but when it comes to these inner rings, the reason is essentially exclusivity. So he's saying that not all exclusive groups are bad, but these inner rings are bad kinds of exclusive groups. And he also says that, even if you manage to break into some inner ring, it's like a never-ending quest. There's always going to be another more exclusive one that you want to break into, and you'll sort of, because you kind of sort out these rings for the wrong reasons, there's actually nothing to enjoy while you're inside them. The only thing to kind of get once you're inside is sort of the next more exclusive ring. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And then the other bit that I read just at the end there is that he says that basically in the context of work, if in your working hours you make the work your end, i.e. you don't care about political things and trying to join exclusive groups, you will accidentally find yourself inside the only circle that matters, which is the circle of kind of legit people essentially. And other legit people will, be able to recognize you as a fellow legit person. And later on he says, and if in your spare time you consort simply with people you like, you will again find that you have come unawares to a real inside, that you are indeed snug and safe at the center of something which, seen from without, would look exactly like an inner ring, but the difference is that the secrecy is accidental, and its exclusiveness a byproduct, and no one was led thither by the lure of the esoteric, for it is only 4 or 5 people who like one another meeting to do things they like. This is friendship. Aristotle placed it among the virtues. It causes perhaps half of all happiness in the world, and no inner ring can ever have it. And then he ends the thing saying, "We are told in scripture that those who ask get." That is true in senses I can't now explore. But in another sense, there is much truth in the schoolboy's principle, them as asks shan't have. To a young person just entering on adult life, the world seems full of insides, full of delightful intimacies and confidentialities, and he desires to enter them. But if he follows that desire, he will reach no inside that is worth reaching. The true road lies in quite another direction. So he basically says that, groups of friends are other kinds of sort of accidentally exclusive groups, and they're very special and they're very good. And he ends by saying that, for young people, the rest of the world seems like there are lots of insides, lots of like inner circles that, are sort of desirable to try and break into. But he says, following that desire, you will not reach any inside that is worth reaching. And, basically don't do that, kids.
Okay, so this is C.S. Lewis giving some kind of like commencement or graduation speech or something. And I read all of this when you sent it to me, and I was like, okay, this is an interesting read, but I don't think it had as profound an effect on me as it seems to have done on you. So can you elaborate on why this was so relevant to like life for you?
I think we've touched on it in plenty of podcasts that we've done. I think, for example, we talk about how back in school, you said you didn't really care about this stuff, but I definitely wanted to be like one of the cool kids, and that's like the earliest manifestation of an inner ring, right? It's like, oh, those people are cool in my class or in my year. I want to be friends with them.
Yeah, I can get on board with that. I've certainly had this desire to fit in manifest itself. It sometimes helpfully, sometimes unhelpfully.
Yeah, and then I think the reason I thought it was so profound is because I've just seen it repeatedly throughout my life, and I think for me certainly it's always been quite a strong desire. Like I said, at school it was kind of, I want to be part of the cool kids group. At university, even though I was more aware of it at this point, I was actively trying to fight the desire. I still felt this like, oh man, those people seem like the cool kids. I want to join them. And then even when I had a job, back when I had a real job, when I joined the company, I still kind of saw the inner ring of like, oh man, those are like the cool people. I want to try and be friends with that guy at the company. And so I felt like, I've just felt this desire very constantly. And I think what C.S. Lewis says about, he says he wants to ask everyone that in the pursuit of this desire, have you ever done something that you're satisfied with or proud of doing? And I think the answer is always no, right? What kind of inner rings have you tried to break into?
Okay, so I can relate to the example of the cool kids one at school, but like, as we've discussed in previous episodes, I didn't really feel any particular pull of that inner ring, or at least didn't think there was a possibility of getting membership into that particular inner ring. Which would have been equivalent to kind of trying to gain membership in the first 11 football team. Is football 11 aside, or is it 7 aside?
No. I mean, I think so. You say you didn't want to be part of the cool kids group. C.S. Lewis, I believe C.S. Lewis subtweets you when he says the paragraph about, some of you will basically think you're above all of this stuff. You don't want to be part of the cool kids group. You don't need money or fancy things. I think you probably had an equivalent inner ring of like, oh, it's just me and my nerd friends. We're in the know. We're playing these little online games, and all these other kids, they're chasing girls and they're chasing football and they're chasing a ball around a pitch. We are
buying black powder missiles and Kings of Chaos.
Yeah, that's precisely it. Like you that was an inner ring of I don't know, maybe it was, maybe it wasn't, but like, has there been any anti-inner rings for you?
Wait, what do you mean by anti-inner rings?
Just like the thing about like not the obvious inner ring.
Oh, not okay, sure. So in the school example, I think there was an element of this is my tribe, this is kind of what we do. But there was, I think what C.S. Lewis is saying is that when you have this inner ring where there is some element of exclusivity in it, then it's a bad sort of an inner ring.
Yeah.
Whereas we were trying to get other people to play Kings of Chaos with us. For the record, when I started the chess club, it wasn't a case of, oh, it's just going to be me and my little nerd friends. It was like look, please, anyone who wants to come, please come to my chess club. So it's more than just 3 people in there. It was sort of inclusivist rather than exclusivist vibe. But I think the first time I remember consciously kind of feeling the pull of the inner ring was at university, when I was first getting into like the PACSOC and the Islamic Society and stuff. And there was this group of like quote cool kids who were sort of a year above me or 2 years above me that I was like, oh, this is great. And they would start like inviting me to their kind of hangouts where it would be like me and maybe 1 or 2 other freshers, and then like the second and third years.
Oh, how did that make you feel?
And that made me feel amazing, because it was like, oh my God, these guys are considering me as like part of their like inner circle. And it was a really nice sense of belonging that I felt. And quite a lot of it was very inclusivistic, like, just sort of open invite, bring whoever along. But there was another group of friends who were also kind of cool, where it was a bit more of an exclusivistic vibe. Like, for example, instead of it being a message on the general WhatsApp group, it would be a private DM on WhatsApp saying, hey, do you want to come around? So-and-so's here. And the subtext would kind of be, by the way, don't tell X, Y, and Z that this is happening.
Yeah.
And anytime that would happen, I would always feel a little bit like, a little bit like shameful for kind of going along with this.
Yeah.
And I haven't really thought about it since like in the last like 5-6 years, but kind of thinking back, I did have that sense of unease, but I think more it was the desire to fit into this cool kids group that made me try and go for that inner ring. And then like a lot of this stuff, I think I noticed it specifically like in my second and third year, where I'd see other inner rings forming, and at this point I was always like really At least I'd like to think I was fairly anti inner ring, in that I would actively make an effort to be non-exclusivistic, like to actively invite everyone to everything, just because I really rebelled against this notion that, you know, friendship groups should be exclusivistic. And so there would be all sorts of situations whereby I'd message someone inviting them, being like, hey, a few of us are going out for dinner, do you want to come? And then be like, oh, sorry, I'm busy, and be like, what's going on? And then they'd kind of be a bit cagey about it, and then I'd find out later that, oh, they were actually going to the cinema with some other group of friends, which was kind of more of an exclusivist thing, and therefore wasn't on the WhatsApp groups.
Yeah.
And I felt that this sort of inner ring dynamic kind of amongst the undergraduates that I was friends with, like, led to a lot of drama and a lot of problems. I don't know if you have any similar experiences.
Do I have any similar experiences?
I think specifically, and don't cancel me for saying this, but I think this inner ring stuff, at least, you know, caveated with amongst the people that I knew, I felt this was more prevalent amongst the girls than amongst the guys.
Oh.
And I've spoken to this about this at length to all of the people who are involved with this, and all of the girls, like, invariably seem to agree that their exclusivistic inner rings were much more of a concrete thing than with the guys. Because the impression I get amongst the guys is that, you know, like, we don't think too hard about this sort of stuff. It's usually like, okay, we're going to play football. Whoever wants to play football, come along. Whereas with the girls that I knew, it was more of a, okay, this is a hangout with us 3 or 4 people, and we don't want to bring those people because that person doesn't like that person, and then someone would have a falling out in that particular friendship group, and then they would become ostracized from the group, like, not sort of explicitly, but would start to get fewer WhatsApp DMs inviting them to things. And
right,
it felt like and anytime at university I'd hear about, like, one of my female friends feeling bad because she was left out from a group, I'd always think, oh damn, here we go again. Whereas I feel like with the guys it was less of an issue. I don't know if you can relate.
Oh, okay. I don't know. No, I had some female friends back at university, and yeah, I don't know. Maybe I just wasn't in on them. Maybe I wasn't in the right rigs or anything. I did hear about this drama and stuff, but yeah, I mean, in my experience, I haven't really noticed any trends. But maybe if we had a girl as a guest on the podcast again, then we can ask them about it. But yeah, that's interesting. I think the inner rings. Yeah, I think like I said, I was aware of the inner ring desire within me at university, and so I did try and sort of actively fight it. However, I think you've mentioned something which I think isn't quite inner ringing, and I remember you used to do this thing which I actually found quite annoying. I remember one time in like 2nd or 3rd year.
Oh, here we go.
In like 2nd or 3rd year, you visited Oxford with like a couple of friends. You guys all stayed over in my room for like I don't know, the weekend or something. All right. And there happened to be an ISOC formal at my college on that day or something, the Friday or the Saturday. Basically like a dinner at my college for the Islamic Society. So like lots of members of the society from around the university came to this dinner thing. And, you know, people who I was mostly friends with, and Ali probably knew a bunch of them. And then after this formal, I was hoping it would, you know, we as in you, me, and the other couple of people who were staying over at my place, we'd go back to mine and have like a really chill kind of intimate sesh. That's what I was hoping for. And then you, I think in your desire to not create an inner ring, you literally invited everyone at the formal to come over to my study and hang out for the evening. And like,
come over to your study, lol.
And it was, I mean, yeah, it was a ton of people, and I remember I was a little bit annoyed by that, because I think it should be acceptable to have sort of limited gatherings with a different dynamic, limited gatherings of limited size, not because of the exclusivity, but because the dynamic changes when there are different groups of people and different numbers of people and stuff like that. So I think it is acceptable to say that, you know, at this, you know, we're having dinner, it's just like a few of us, and that's it. I think there is an acceptable way to do that, and a reasonable way to do that. So you've kind of called that out as inner ringing, when I'm sure it often is, but I think it also often isn't.
Okay, fine. So this kind of reminds me of a tweet that you linked me a few weeks ago, I think, which was, I think it was along the lines of, it was someone saying that, oh, do you remember that time in high school where you'd go to, where there'd be like a party around someone's house, but only a select few people would actually be invited to sleep over that night, and therefore you'd have to kind of talk about it amongst each other, but not too like blatantly, so that other people wouldn't feel left out. Wow, what a time to be alive! You know,
I sent you that.
Yeah, or I came across on Twitter or something like that, and I was like, oh, that's profound, because that is like, you know, like on the surface, that sounds like not inner ringing, because obviously, if you're staying over at someone's house, feasibly there's only room for maybe 4 or 5 people to stay over, depending on the size of a house.
Yeah.
And therefore, you have a quote good reason for to be exclusivist.
Yes.
But it does feel very inner ringing, because it is very much the case that in that context, you want to be part of the inner ring who gets chosen to sleep over that night. And in a way, you feel the allure of being part of the inner ring. And if everyone could stay over and it was just a case of, people's mums allowing them to, then it wouldn't be as fun, as interesting a thing as that not being the case. And I get that that's not what you're saying about your sort of having 4 people in your bedroom rather than 15 people in your bedroom. But I think that is the sort of inner ringing that I will sort of try and rebel against.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, I get what you mean. You're basically saying that there's like, all right, we need a word for it when it's not quite inner ringing. Okay, let's just say, like, let's make a distinction between like an exclusive group and an inner ring, where like an exclusive group is like I don't know, accidentally exclusive or incidentally exclusive, whereas an inner ring is like meant to be exclusive.
Okay, so incidentally exclusive would be something like, hey, all of my friends who also play World of Warcraft, we're having a LAN party where we play World of Warcraft and order pizza together. I mean, that's incidentally exclusive because it just so happens that I don't have many friends who play World of Warcraft.
You could have stopped there.
I set you up for that one. Well done. Whereas I feel like your thing was in that particular situation, it was specifically we are actively going to exclude people from this hangout. Ostensibly, the reason would have been, because only 4 of us are staying over. But that doesn't preclude 15 people from coming over, and then the 4 that stay over will end up because they're staying over, and people are going to leave at broadly the same time. So I don't think your example fits into this incidental exclusivity. I think it fits into intentional exclusivity.
Okay, I think it's intentional exclusivity, but not exclusivity for its own sake. It's like, I want to hang out with Ali and another couple of mates who are just down for the weekend. That should be a reasonable thing for me to be able to do without having to invite everyone in the college over to my room so that I'm not excluding them. So like, I think you agreed that was a reasonable desire of mine, and not me, and not like an inner ringing kind of desire.
No, I agree. I think the intentions for that were pure, but I think
there's a danger. It's like the sleepover situation where you're kind of playing with fire, where it's like, okay, you're in a large group of people, and then a small group of you needs to leave that large group of people without anyone
clocking.
Or
anyone feeling bad or feeling left out.
It's kind of playing with fire, because there is a risk of people feeling left out when you try and do that.
And I think in that particular circumstance, where a group of 15 people are going out for dinner at your college, and then of those 15 people, like, everyone is kind of like, so what's kind of happening now? And then 4 people have to break away, be like, we're just going to head up to Taymor's bedroom. That feels like, while the intention might be honorable, and I get your desire to just hang out with Ollie and his mates from Cambridge, I think it is too much playing with fire, and therefore in that circumstance it makes sense to err on the side of inclusivity rather than exclusivity.
Sure. Yeah. Okay, I potentially back your decision there. I think there are these situations where it's kind of I think playing with fire is a good phrase, and I agree that it's probably best to be kind of cautious about not excluding other people in those situations. But I think in general, like, I think sometimes the desire to be, I guess we're sort of moving away from inner ringing now. I think like C.S. Lewis has made all the points that need to be made, and I think there's enough to think about there. But I think the desire to want to be inclusive can sometimes go a little bit too far. And this sounds like something that I might get cancelled for, but I assure you that's not the road I'm heading down.
Here we go.
Put your pitchforks away. I was listening to a podcast a few months ago. I think it was Invest Like the Best with this lady who she's like a researcher in like group dynamics, and so this was like up my street, and she's written a book on like group dynamics about like how different sort of the dynamics of different groups of sort of social groups. And she said that like there's this thing that sometimes happens nowadays where let's say there's a bunch of people in a group who are like single moms or something. There's like a group of single moms, and they want to have like a single moms kind of single moms kind of dinner at one of their houses, and then one of the single moms invites one of her friends, asks can I invite my friend so and so, she's not a single mom or anything, but like I think she'll enjoy it, or something like that. And she gives this kind of example where I think most people face in that scenario, like if you're one of these single mums in this group and one of the other single mums is like, oh, can I invite my other friend who's like not related to the rest of us or this activity that we do, you feel like a bit of a dick for being like, I don't know, man, it kind of changes the vibe though, right? When there's like a non-single mum at the single mum event, and you'd feel like a bit of a dick for that. And to the extent that quite possibly no one is going to speak up against it, and it's going to be like a bunch of single mums and then this rando who's like friends with one of them. And I think it's true that it does change the vibe. I say change, I don't say kill, I don't say ruin or anything, but it does change the vibe when different kinds of people are present at an event. And it is reasonable to want to have certain gatherings where it's like, the single mums to like talk about being a single mum or something. I don't know, like, or like, your World of Warcraft thing, or I don't know, a bunch of like startup founders wanting to have like a dinner once a month to like talk about, startup stuff. I think these are reasonable things, and I think that over inclusivity kind of kills these sort of spaces.
Yeah, so I actually had an example of this fairly recently. So this was a gathering of guy friends at university, and we knew that one of the girls that we were all just happened to be friends with was like at a loose end that evening, and was
at a loose end. What does that mean?
Was at a loose end.
What does that mean?
Therefore, like
she was free that evening.
She was free that evening, and was sort of asking, "Hey, anyone want to hang out and do something?" And we'd like got this like kind of lads evening planned out, and I think everyone kind of thought about this. And so I proffered up to the WhatsApp group, hey, what do we think about inviting Jane to the lads only hangout, or should we keep it lads only? And then no one replied for like a solid like 5 hours or something. And then some hero said something like, well, is John bringing his girlfriend? To which John immediately replied, no, she's busy. And then it was like, okay, sorted. It's going to be a lads only event.
That question was as it could have been like, wait, are we having pizza at the lads thing? Oh yeah, it's lads only then. Yeah. It's such an irrelevant question.
No, it's actually not, because it was the perfect way to signal without being a dick that this was going to be a lads only event.
Yeah.
And we all commented on this when the event happened. We were like, and everyone was kind of like, yeah, I don't want to be the only one. I don't want to be the one to say no.
Exactly.
Because everyone wanted it to be a lads only event.
Yeah.
And like, it's not that we have anything against this female friend of ours. It's just that it would have changed the vibe a little bit.
Yeah, exactly.
And occasionally in that evening, we kind of commented, hey, if Jane were here, we wouldn't be having this discussion right now.
Yeah.
So I suppose it's sort of equivalent to the single moms talking about single mom stuff.
Yeah, I think it's kind of related to the idea of like, safe spaces or whatever, where people who share some characteristics, people from some minority group can just sort of
like the lads.
Yeah, like the lads, like the straight lads. Look, what I'm saying is the straight lads should have a space where they can come together
and talk about straight lad stuff.
Yeah. I think it's related to the sort of the idea of like the safe space and things. And I think there should definitely be a room for these kinds of things. But I think the desire to be inclusive sometimes infringes on that.
Definitely, yeah, because it made me feel quite uneasy to not invite Jane to this particular lads gathering, but I knew that it would change the vibe.
Yeah,
so I had to kind of get over this inclusivist at all costs.
Yeah, and so I remember in the podcast, the lady kind of said that in that scenario, where someone offers to like invite the thing, if you're like the organizer of the group, then it's basically your responsibility to say like, look, I'm sorry, friend of Jane. This was like a single mom's thing. Jane's a double mom. She's
very good.
It should be acceptable for a group organizer to be like, look, I'm sorry, nothing against Jane, but this is not the time or the place. This is the kind of event we're having, and that's it. And that's fine. And that's not an inner ring.
Okay, fine. There's another bit of C.S. Lewis's thingy where he talks about the pleasure of mentioning the inner ring to people who are not part of the inner ring.
Ring signaling.
Ring signaling. This really grinds my gears. I think I might have mentioned this on a previous episode, but one thing that irks me more than almost anything else in the world is when people mention the existence of WhatsApp groups to people who are not part of those WhatsApp groups.
Oh my God.
I'm like, why? What on earth is the point? And I've been to gatherings whereby, like of the 8 people in the gathering, like 6 are part of a particular WhatsApp group. And some people within this group will be referencing jokes that were made in the WhatsApp group. They're like, oh my God, did you see that thing that was posted in WhatsApp group? And I'm like, oh no, please stop it. Why on earth are you doing that? I don't know if you feel as strong.
Yeah, I think, I'm also kind of fairly sensitive to, I guess like just sort of inside jokes being referenced amongst people who like aren't in on the joke, and like it's one of my least favorite things, and it's something I always try and like emotionally manage at at gatherings, where it's like in your head you're kind of doing the math of like, okay, based on everyone here, what's like the acceptable kind of topics? What kind of stuff can I talk about?
Yeah, I find I do that quite a lot as well, which is kind of unusual because usually I don't emotionally manage anyone's feelings.
No, you're right, you don't.
I just kind of think about myself and that's about it. But it's one of the few areas in which I'm very, very sensitive to not.
Is that because you've kind of been on the receiving end of that?
Maybe. I guess it is. I think I have a few times where I just kind of, what's a joke, guys? Or, oh, classic John. Just kind of to casually highlight that. The absurdity of the situation. But usually in those situations I'm like if I'm sort of on the receiving end of it, and I think most of the time I don't know if I think most of the time it's probably unintentional. I'm just pretty open about it. I'm like, right, what are we talking about? what WhatsApp group is this? Why wasn't I invited? Kind of thing. I think it's sort of like a nice way to address the elephant in the room and sort of just kind of jokingly address it. I'm trying to think if there's any examples in my life where I've been the one to ring signal amongst people who aren't.
Intentionally ring signal?
Yeah.
I'm sure there must have been. I'm sure I've done it tons of times.
Oh, intentionally?
Yeah, probably when I was younger. I like to think I wouldn't have done it in the past few years.
Yeah, I mean in the last few years.
Like, okay.
I obviously can't condone any of my actions before like age 16 as being fully conscious.
Yeah.
Fully competent. One area in which I'm unsure about the ring signaling thing is in posting photos on Facebook of group events.
Oh, interesting.
Because like on the one hand, Facebook is the easiest place to share pictures of a group event because it's a bit of a faff to make an iCloud shared photo album. It's a bit of a faff to make an album of Google Photos and add everyone's Google account to it. Everyone kind of still has Facebook, and it's easy enough to tag people in it. And I don't think for me the intention is to kind of ring signal in any way. In fact, if anything, I think it's sort of I'm posting stuff on Facebook, sort of feeling annoyed at the fact that there is going to be some level of ring signaling involved in this. That hey, we're the ones who went on holiday to Spain together or whatever. And but beyond that, I'd like to think I don't intentionally ring signal, but I don't know. I'd be curious to hear from the audience. Do you ring signal? Like, what sort of inner rings do you want to be part of? Do you aspire to be part of, like, in your life today? And are you doing things that you're not proud of in order to get there?
Yeah, I think it's a really important question for us to all think about. And I think, like, as C.S. Lewis says, this is something that is going to come up time and time again all throughout our lives. It's not like once you get over this in secondary school, then you're never going to face it again. You're done. It's not like once you get over it at university, it's going to be like a constant repetitive thing that you, sort of really have to actively resist. And it's something I'm trying to be mindful of.
Actually, so when we were talking about the whole ringing thing, it sort of reminded me of, I suppose for me, one ring that I feel I'm not part of is like the study YouTuber kind of ring.
Wait, what? What's this?
So there are a few people who make kind of study-related YouTube videos.
Okay.
And a lot of them seem to know each other and seem to like hang out, and a lot of them are part of the same management agency, which kind of makes sense, and they kind of go on like study YouTuber panels together at like YouTuber conferences and things.
Yeah.
And I've never really been part of this kind of inner ring, even though I kind of want to be. But
why do you kind of want to be?
Because it's just kind of cool.
People with mutual interests you want to hang out with.
Yeah, and because it's rare enough to meet other YouTubers of a similar size, like in day-to-day life.
Like 6 foot, kind of 70 kilogram.
6 foot, 70 kilograms. 5'11" and a half is what I tell myself, because I don't want to over-exaggerate my own height.
Nice.
But it's hard enough to meet other people who are 5'11" and a half. And so part of me wants to be part of that inner ring, but then another part of me is thinking that, well, while they're going off and talking in their panels and stuff, I'm, sitting down on my laptop and doing some editing. So kind of part of me wants to feel as if I'm being the sound craftsman and just kind of doing the thing.
I mean, it doesn't sound like that's an inner ring, right? It's people with shared interests. It's just like, yeah. I mean, it's not like built for exclusivity or something. Or have you applied to be a member and they're like,
no, I've never applied to be a member. I've never actively expressed an interest in being a member so
would you expect to have been invited by now?
Oh, good question. Would I expect to have been invited by now? So that's kind of hard to answer, because if I even entertain the thought of, expectations that I might have been invited, like I've got an avalanche of sort of counter arguments to that fact to kind of make my thinking go back to what it should be, which is that no, I don't expect any kind of invite to this kind of thing at all.
Okay, maybe expect is. I think you did say a few minutes ago that you were kind of hoping.
Yeah,
you kind of want to be part of it.
Yeah, I kind of want to be part of it, and I would like to be invited to kind of speak at a study tuber panel and stuff. But expect is like, I won't have any expectations about this.
Yeah.
this sort of stuff. But it also kind of reminds me of like this whole movement within healthcare of people becoming interested in tech, because the whole like med tech is the next big thing, obviously.
Yeah.
And like big data is going to change healthcare and stuff.
Oh yeah.
And there are all sorts of these sorts of like, there's the NHS Clinical Entrepreneur Program, which is fine, and there's like all these like med tech conferences and talks and things. And it seems to me that the people who kind of go to these med tech talks and stuff are the people who are not kind of putting their head down and actually doing anything. Whereas I feel like the story that I want to tell myself is that the people who are putting their heads down and doing the work and actually making a difference in medtech are not the sorts of people who are talking about how much of a difference it's going to make. I don't know if that's at all relevant to the inner ring thing, but it probably isn't really.
I think that's a little uncharitable. And I've held similar opinions about, say, like the Entrepreneurship Society, university or whatever. And I kind of found that the people at university who are actually doing this stuff, they weren't also... They generally weren't the people who were showing up to these events and things. They were just kind of getting on with it. But I think it is kind of uncharitable because, in your case, you've been exposed to like tech from really early on. You've been sort of into this stuff, learned to code, blah, blah, blah. And so like you've already had all the sort of exposure bit done. And now all of these events and things, yeah, you could sort of point them and say, oh, haha, it's just people like talking rather than doing. But like that's the exposure step for a lot of people that you've already had. And similarly, at university, like, yeah, fine, the people who are sort of starting actual companies and things, and while they're at university, they're not also going to the talks and things, but that's because they've already had the exposure step and the kind of learning step beforehand anyway, which lets them sort of do that. And so I don't know, it's a bit of a cynical view.
Yeah, you're right, I'm being a dick, I'm sorry.
Yeah, okay.
That was a very uncharitable viewpoint to hold.
Yeah. Right, I think that's it for the discussion. Let's end on an insight of the week. I did a tweet.
There we go. More shameless self-promotion.
Oh man, I did a tweet thread, if you will, last week. For some reason, a thought that I kept coming back to was that when I was younger, when aged like 6 to 12, let's say, I remember when you used to go to a friend's house or when you had friends over at your house, the feeling when it was time for everyone to go home, that used to be like genuinely devastating. That used to be truly, truly like, I mean, I remember the feeling well, unless I'm misremembering, obviously. And like the worst things that have that happened to me in my life right now, the kind of things that happen like once or twice a year, like they're really bad things. That was the feeling I used to have every time it was time for my friends to go home. Yeah, it's like, I thought this was interesting because I think the turning point when I stopped having this feeling as a kid was when basically when I had my own computer at home, because this sort of meant that I had, I think like before the stage of having my computer, to be honest, I don't know what I used to do at home. I'm sure there was a bit of TV in there. I think we had a PS2, we had a Game Boy. I'm sure there was some of that stuff in there. But for the most part, I don't think I really existed. I think I really only existed inside, some kind of structured activity like school or hanging out with going to a friend's house or doing whatever, like, I don't know, football or something. And once I had a computer, my own computer at home, with internet access, it kind of opened up a whole new world of existence for me, where I now also existed when I was on my own. I existed, and I was on the internet, and like I had this whole life when I'm on my own. Whereas before that, when I was on my own, like I said, I don't recall existing on my own before that. And so that the first sort of thought based on that feeling was that, like, man, the internet is absolutely life-changing stuff. I think it was amazing to have that as a kid. The second thought was that maybe the internet thing is part of it, but maybe also, when I look back, I think hanging out with friends and stuff back in those days used to be like the best thing ever. Like, you kind of have your friend round all day or whatever, and you kind of, you start off going outside and playing like some football and stuff, and just kind of like running around, chilling around outside. Then you'd come inside and, have some lunch or something, and then you'd like, play video games indoors and stuff. And like the chills as a kid, the sessions, they used to be so good. They used to be like ridiculously good. And I think the reason I've started thinking about it, and I think the reason is because the structure of sessions as a kid is basically optimal for being a kid. It's like,
how so?
What else could you possibly want to do apart from go play outside, then go play inside, and punctuate that with some food and some drink? I mean, that's just the life, right? And I think somehow accidentally, the optimal kid sessions are actually the standard kid sesh. At least it was for us. I remember it being pretty great, right? Do you remember that?
Yeah, it was pretty great.
It was awesome. However, I think the standard adult sesh is like, and this is we've talked about this stuff before. The standard adult sesh is like 3-hour dinner, 2 to 3 hour dinner after work, or whatever, with like a small group of friends or something. And I just don't think that's optimal for anyone. Like we've said this stuff before. It's similar to the stuff we were talking about on the last episode, which was 2 weeks ago, about intentional socializing. Of like, we should structure our sort of socializing in more optimal ways so that everyone gets more out of it. I think as a kid, it actually was optimal somehow accidentally, and it was awesome, man. Those were the days.
Yeah, I think there's still something very, very optimal about the whole playing outside then playing inside, punctuated by a bit of food. Like I can remember like sort of a few days where we have friends going back to university for reunions and stuff, and kind of just playing lacrosse for a few hours, followed by like a barbecue, followed by going around someone's house to like chill and play board games. That is like optimal sesh.
Yeah. Okay. So you do actually do that occasionally.
Yeah, but like once in a blue moon.
Yeah. Yeah. It just goes back to the intentional socializing thing of like, I mean, you seem to think that's the optimal sesh even now. I think you're probably right. The few times I've had that sesh, it's been pretty optimal. And why don't you have that sesh every Saturday? Why don't you have it every week? Yeah, anyway, that's my insight.
That's your insight of the week. Okay, awesome. I think that's a good place to end it. Thanks very much for listening. Apologies again for no episode last week. We were just feeling a bit lazy. And yeah, if you've listened this far, please leave us a review and sign up to Skillshare at skillshare.com/notoverthinking, because the more people that sign up to Skillshare, the more money we get for these sponsorships. Which is ideal, because at the moment we're losing a lot of money on the monthly hosting fees of this podcast.
Yes.
Yes, that's why we want that
dozens
sponsorship.
of pounds.
Yeah, that's why we want that sponsorship dollar. Anyway, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.